They do not always panic when you cry. They do not always break when you beg. They may not even collapse when you walk away. What often shakes them most is something much quieter. It is the moment they realize that they can no longer reach you emotionally. When your reactions stop, the entire pattern begins to change. The arguments stop giving them energy. The apologies stop pulling you back. The guilt no longer changes your decisions. The silence no longer means that you are waiting for them to notice you. Instead, it means that something inside you has changed, and that change can be difficult for a person who became used to having emotional access to you. If you have lived through a relationship like this, remember that walking away does not mean you were weak. Choosing peace does not mean you lost. Sometimes the strongest thing you can do is stop explaining yourself to someone who has already decided not to understand you. If this message speaks to your experience, take a moment to like this video, save it, or subscribe as a reminder that your decision to step away was important. When you emotionally withdraw from a person with strong narcissistic patterns, the first reaction may not be sadness, it may be disbelief. The reason is simple. A relationship built around control, attention, and repeated emotional reactions can create an expectation that you will always remain psychologically available. You may have threatened to leave before. You may have cried, you may have argued, you may have blocked them and then returned. You may have created distance only to reconnect after they apologized, became charming, or made you feel guilty. Over time, a pattern can develop. They learn that distance does not necessarily mean an ending. They learn that enough pressure, affection, anger, guilt, or silence may eventually bring you back into the same emotional conversation. Because of that history, your final withdrawal may not immediately register as final. They may tell themselves that you are simply upset. They may believe that you are exhausted and will eventually calm down. They may assume that you are trying to get their attention. They may even believe that you are waiting for them to make the first move. This is why quiet detachment can be more confusing than an emotional confrontation. A dramatic argument still provides information. Anger is a reaction. Tears are a reaction. Begging is a reaction. Even hatred can be experienced as proof that the emotional connection is still active. But calmness provides very little for them to work with. When you stop explaining, they lose information. When you stop defending yourself, they lose an opportunity to argue. When you stop reacting, they lose the emotional feedback that once told them they still had influence. At first, they may dismiss the change. They may think you will return after enough time passes. They may tell themselves that you are pretending to be strong. They may believe that you are trying to punish them with silence. They may decide that you will eventually become lonely and contact them again. This is not necessarily hope in the healthy sense. It can be a form of denial. Accepting that you have truly detached would force them to face a painful possibility. They would have to accept that you made a decision they could not control. They would have to accept that you no longer need their approval, attention, or presence to feel emotionally stable. For someone who depends heavily on being important to another person, that realization can be deeply uncomfortable. So instead of accepting it, they may minimize it. They may tell themselves that you were never that important. They may say that the relationship was already over. They may convince themselves that you were the problem. They may tell other people that they were the one who wanted distance. The purpose of these explanations is often to protect their sense of self. If they can change the meaning of what happened, they do not have to face the meaning of what happened. Then another internal reaction may begin. The person may experience what can be described as an ego injury. This does not mean that they are simply hurt because they miss you. It can mean that the loss of your attention challenges the image they have of their own importance. Your attention may have confirmed that they mattered. Your emotional reactions may have confirmed that they had influence. Your willingness to explain yourself may have confirmed that their opinion carried weight. Your repeated return may have confirmed that they could still pull you back into the relationship. When those things disappear, the feedback system changes. It is like looking into a mirror and suddenly finding that the mirror is no longer reflecting anything back. Your value has not disappeared. Their value has not necessarily disappeared either, but the external confirmation has disappeared. That can create a strange internal discomfort. Instead of clearly recognizing the source, they may experience irritation, restlessness, anger, or a vague feeling that they have been disrespected. Small details can suddenly become very important. They may replay an old conversation. They may remember the exact moment you stopped responding. They may wonder why you did not react to a message. They may think about why a certain insult no longer affected you. They may search for the moment when they lost the emotional advantage. The deeper issue is not always the event itself. The deeper issue is what the event represents. It represents a loss of influence, And for a person who has built much of their identity around influence, attention, or superiority, that can feel threatening. Instead of sitting with that discomfort, they may put the responsibility outside themselves. They may decide that you are ungrateful. They may decide that you are selfish. They may decide that you have become cold. They may call you unstable because you no longer react the way you once did. They may say that you changed. In one sense, you did change. But changing your response to unhealthy behavior is not the same as becoming a bad person. You may simply have stopped participating in a pattern that was exhausting you. This is often where testing begins. They may send a small message. They may ask an unnecessary question. They may bring up an old memory. They may suddenly become unusually kind. They may appear concerned about your well-being. They may send something that seems innocent but is designed to see whether you will respond. The important part is not always what they say. The important part is what happens when you do not respond in the expected way. If you answer with the same emotional energy as before, the old system can quickly restart. If you respond with anger, they still have access to your emotions. If you respond with long explanations, they have material to argue with. If you defend every accusation, they have another opening. But if you remain calm and consistent, the old pattern becomes much harder to activate. This is why their behavior may suddenly become confusing. One moment they may appear caring, the next moment they may become cold, they may move from kindness to criticism, they may act as though they desperately want you back and then suddenly claim that they never cared, they may praise you one day and insult you the next. These changes can feel impossible to understand when you are looking only at the surface, but underneath them may be one simple struggle. They are trying to find a response that works. If kindness does not work, pressure may follow. If pressure does not work, guilt may follow. If guilt does not work, anger may appear. If anger does not work, they may suddenly act completely indifferent. The goal is often not resolution. The goal is re-engagement. They do not necessarily need you to come back as a healthy partner. They may simply need proof that they can still affect you. Even anger can provide that proof. If they can make you angry, they know they still have access. If they can make you defend yourself, they know they still have influence. If they can make you explain why you left, they know the emotional conversation is still alive. But silence, distance, and emotional neutrality provide very little feedback. That can create increasing frustration. They may become more persistent because the old methods no longer produce predictable results. This is where you may notice rapid changes in their behavior. A message may sound loving in the morning and insulting later in the day. They may say they miss you and then tell you that you were never important. They may claim to be completely over you while still finding indirect ways to appear in your awareness. They may post things publicly. They may mention you to mutual contacts. They may suddenly become very visible around people they know will eventually tell you about it. These actions can sometimes be attempts to create a reaction without directly asking for one. The message underneath may be simple. Notice me. React to me. Show me that I still matter. But when you remain emotionally unavailable, the pressure can increase. The person may begin to feel that the rules have changed without their permission. That is an especially difficult realization for someone who is accustomed to controlling the emotional rhythm of a relationship. They cannot decide when you care. They cannot decide when you respond. They cannot decide when you return. They cannot decide whether you forgive them. They cannot decide whether you continue to participate. You have removed yourself from the system. And that is different from simply winning an argument. When repeated attempts to regain control fail, anger may become stronger. This anger is not always loud. Sometimes it looks like sarcasm. Sometimes it looks like sudden coldness. Sometimes it looks like contempt. Sometimes it appears as a campaign of criticism where your entire character is rewritten. You may suddenly be described as selfish, cruel, unstable, disloyal, or difficult. The person may start collecting examples to support this new version of you. A small disagreement from years ago can become evidence of your supposed character. A boundary can be described as an attack. Your decision to leave can be described as betrayal. Your refusal to respond can be described as arrogance. This kind of rewriting can protect the person from a much more uncomfortable thought, the thought that you left because you no longer wanted to participate. If they accept that possibility, they have to face their own behavior. It is easier to say that you were defective than to ask why you became unwilling to stay. It is easier to call you cruel than to admit that your patience finally ended. It is easier to say that you never mattered than to accept that they lost access to someone who once gave them a great deal of emotional attention. This is why anger can become mixed with shame. Shame can be difficult for anyone to process, but some people defend against it by immediately looking for someone else to blame. Instead of saying, "I feel rejected," the mind says, "They are horrible." Instead of saying, "I no longer have control," the mind says they are disrespectful. Instead of saying, "I am hurt," the mind says they deserve punishment. The result can be resentment. They may replay the moments when you did not answer. They may replay the moment you walked away. They may imagine conversations where they finally proved themselves right. They may imagine you returning and realizing what you lost. They may imagine themselves becoming successful enough, attractive enough, or powerful enough that you regret leaving. These fantasies can provide temporary relief, but they do not restore the old relationship. They do not restore the old control. And they do not change the fact that your emotional availability is gone. That is what makes the anger so exhausting. It cannot solve the actual problem. The actual problem is that the old emotional connection no longer works the way it used to. Then another stage can appear: obsession. This does not necessarily mean romantic love. It can be an obsessive need to understand what happened. How did you stop caring? Why did the old tactics stop working? Why are you not reacting? Why do you look calmer than expected? Why are you not begging for another chance? Why do you seem able to continue with your life? These questions can occupy a great deal of mental space. They may check your social media. They may ask mutual contacts about you. They may look for signs that you are struggling. They may search for evidence that you secretly regret leaving. They may watch from a distance without openly admitting that they are watching. The focus becomes investigative. They are trying to find an explanation that makes sense within their old understanding of you. If they believed you could not live without them, your independence becomes confusing. If they believed you would always return, your consistency becomes threatening. If they believed they were essential, your peace becomes evidence that their assumption was wrong. That is why your calmness can be so powerful. You do not have to prove anything. You do not have to announce that you have moved on. You do not have to make public statements. You do not have to show them that you are happy. Your consistency says enough. Every day that you do not return gives them another piece of information. Every time you resist the urge to explain yourself, the old dynamic becomes weaker. Every time you refuse to enter another argument, the emotional system loses energy. And eventually, they may face something they have been avoiding. There is no emotional reaction left to obtain. That can create a deeper feeling of emptiness. This emptiness is different from ordinary loneliness. Loneliness is the desire for connection. Emptiness can feel more like a lack of internal structure. When someone depends heavily on outside attention to feel important, attractive, powerful, or secure, the loss of that attention can expose how little stability exists inside. Without constant stimulation, the person may feel bored. They may become restless. They may become irritated without understanding why. Achievements may not feel satisfying. New conversations may feel shallow. New relationships may provide temporary excitement but fail to create lasting peace. They may begin searching for something else to fill the space. More work, more attention, more social activity, more admiration, more conflict, more excitement, more people, more distractions. The problem is that external stimulation can distract from emptiness without resolving it. The person can become busy enough to avoid silence, but when the noise stops, the same discomfort may return. This is one reason solitude can feel threatening to someone who relies heavily on external validation. When there is no audience, there is no mirror. When there is no reaction, there is nothing immediately available to confirm the desired image. Your absence may therefore represent more than the loss of a relationship. It may represent the loss of a stabilizing source of attention. And this is where your emotional withdrawal can have a meaning that is very different for you than it is for them. For you, stepping away may create space to recover. For them, your withdrawal may create a space they now have to fill. That does not mean you are responsible for their feelings. You are not. Their internal world is their responsibility. You are not required to return simply because someone is uncomfortable with your absence. You are not required to keep responding so that another person can feel secure. You are not required to explain the same boundary over and over. You are allowed to become unavailable to a dynamic that was damaging your peace. When the emptiness becomes difficult to tolerate, another defense may appear: reconstruction. The person begins rewriting the story. This version of the story is often very different from what actually happened. They may decide that they were never emotionally invested. They may say that they were already losing interest. They may say that they were the one who ended the relationship. They may say that you were too demanding. They may say that you were beneath their standards. They may say that you were draining them. They may say that they were already moving forward long before you left. The purpose is not necessarily to create an accurate history. The purpose is to create a history they can live with. If you were never important, there is nothing to mourn. If you were the problem, there is nothing to regret. If they chose the ending, they were never rejected. If they discarded you first in their own story, they do not have to accept that you made an independent choice. This kind of rewriting can act like psychological armor. The more often the story is repeated, the more familiar it becomes. Eventually, a person may speak about the past as though their rewritten version has always been true. That does not make it true, it simply makes it easier for them to maintain. This is also why you may see exaggerated indifference. They may act as if you never existed. They may avoid mentioning you. They may appear completely unaffected. They may suddenly present themselves as happier than ever. Do not automatically interpret that appearance as proof that they have healed. People can look calm while avoiding deep reflection. People can look successful while carrying the same internal patterns. People can enter new relationships without changing the behavior that damaged the previous one. A new person does not automatically create a new personality. A new relationship does not automatically create emotional maturity. A new beginning does not erase old patterns. Without honest self-reflection, the same problems can simply move into a different relationship. The names change, the circumstances change, the story changes, but the pattern remains. The same need for admiration can return. The same intolerance of boundaries can return. The same need for control can return. The same difficulty with emotional independence can return. The same cycle can begin again with someone else. That is why your withdrawal does not necessarily change the other person. It changes your position in the dynamic. And that distinction matters. You are not responsible for fixing them. You are not responsible for making them understand. You are not responsible for waiting until they admit what they did. You are not responsible for proving that your pain was real. Sometimes healing begins when you stop making your recovery dependent on another person's understanding. You may never receive the apology you deserved. You may never hear them admit that they hurt you. You may never see them become the person you hoped they would become. And that can be painful. But your healing cannot depend on those things. The most important change may happen inside you. At first, you may stop reacting because you are exhausted. Then you may stop reacting because you are protecting yourself. Eventually, you stop reacting because you no longer feel the need to participate. That is a very different place. You are no longer trying to punish them. You are no longer trying to make them chase you. You are no longer waiting for them to finally understand your value. You are simply living without the old emotional system. That is why your silence can mean something different from their silence. Their silence may be used as a tactic. Your silence can be a boundary. Their distance may be designed to provoke you. Your distance can be designed to protect you. Their indifference may be performative. Your peace does not have to be. And once you understand that difference, you stop measuring your healing by their reaction. You stop checking whether they miss you. You stop wondering whether they regret losing you. You stop looking for signs that they are struggling. You stop needing proof that your absence affected them, because the goal was never to make them collapse. The goal was to stop yourself from collapsing. The goal was never to defeat them. The goal was to leave the system that kept hurting you. The goal was never to make them understand your worth. The goal was to understand your own worth without needing their approval. This is where the cycle can end for you. They may continue to repeat the same patterns. They may find another source of attention. They may create another relationship. They may tell another version of the story. They may appear completely unaffected, but none of that needs to determine your future. You do not need to know what happens inside their mind after you leave. You need to know what happens inside your own life when you stop giving your peace away. Your consistency matters. Your boundaries matter. Your silence, when it protects you, matters. Your decision not to return to the same cycle matters. And if you have spent years believing that walking away was cruel, remember this. Leaving a harmful dynamic is not the same as abandoning someone who genuinely needs your help. You can care about another person's humanity without giving them unlimited access to you. You can wish someone well and still keep your distance. You can forgive someone and still decide that they no longer belong in your life. You can stop hating someone without allowing them back into your emotional world. That is maturity. And eventually something changes. You stop thinking about whether they are watching. You stop wondering whether they noticed. You stop imagining what they might say. You stop checking whether they have moved on. You stop trying to understand every contradiction. The relationship becomes a chapter instead of a daily emotional experience. That is the part they cannot control. They may control the story they tell. They may control how they present themselves. They may control what they say to other people. But they cannot control what you learn from the experience. They cannot control the boundaries you build afterward. They cannot control the peace you create. They cannot control the person you become once you are no longer constantly reacting to them. And that is the real ending. Not the day you block a number, not the day you leave the house, not the day you stop answering messages,